Hey, everybody. We'll give everyone a few minutes to jump on, and then we'll get the ball rolling here. All right, cool. So I give everyone 30 seconds, so we can get the ball rolling. This is obviously recorded as well, so everyone's going to get a follow-up session of this as well, so they have it in their inbox so they can look back at it in the future. So I'll kick it off. So my name's Matt. I'm Do Control's head of revenue. I have my teammate here, Albert. If you want to do a quick intro.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Albert. I'm the solution engineer here for Do Control.
Awesome. So as everyone knows, I know some of you have joined our previous session as well, is, we're working on a Google Workspace security webinar series, really focused on, what are the main challenges that businesses today are focused on protecting within Google Workspace? Why do these challenges exist today? And what are some innovative and unique approaches that we can take to start to solve those problems? So today we're going to focus on one of the biggest problems is controlling external sharing of PII and sensitive data. And I'll get into a little more detail of what do we mean by PII and what do we mean by sensitive data. But, this is a very common topic that we not only see across our customers, but what we often talk about when we're talking with analysts, the market of how do I actually identify what is risky data and how do I put guardrails in place on ensuring that I can control that risky data without hindering business productivity. So let's get going. So 25% of all externally exposed data contains sensitive information. So this is something that we pulled not just from our customer base, but able to also pull this from our prospect and our analyst database as well to understand that, okay, if you have 4 assets exposed, 1 out of 4 of those are containing sensitive information. And I'll give a definition of sensitive information in a few seconds. But think about the scale of that. Think about if you have 1 million exposed assets, you have over 250,000 of those contain sensitive information that's critical to your business. Just the scale of that is almost impossible to, one, just identify, but also quantify for a business. So let's just level step first and actually understand what is the definition of sensitive data and what does sensitive data mean? Sensitive data, in its simplest form, refers to the information that is disclosed or accessed without authorization could cause significant harm to your business. Sensitive data include some of the, I would call the basic information, so PII information, medical information, social security numbers, or it could be specific data points that matter to your business. That could be a customer code or a specific code that you have for your business that is critical that for your specific business, that's information that can't be exposed externally. To sum it all up, it's relatively simple. Sensitive data is information that you do not want put into the wrong hands outside your organization. How you identify that can be complex because it's not so black and white. Something like PII, a social security number, or even credit card information, sure, that can be black and white. But outside of that, it's sometimes hard to identify. But even the basic stuff can be hard to identify as well. And that's what we'll get into a little bit of, what are the challenges that businesses are facing today when they're trying to identify sensitive data and or control it. So everyone's heard the term DLP. What does DLP stand for? DLP is data loss prevention. Being able to actually identify what data is leaving your organization and put guardrails and controls about that. And what are the challenges that many businesses are facing today in that area? So first off, there's actually a difficulty in being able to actually identify what is risky data, leading to a high rate of false positives. A high rate of false positives, starts to lose trust, not just in the end user, but in leadership as well, that, we have the right infrastructure in place to control risky data. Why is there such a hard time of identifying risky data? There's a few reasons. One is, even for those black and white values, the ones that are, let's say, social security numbers, credit card information, if you think about a social security number, for example, let's say you want to say, show me all my assets that contain social security numbers. Great. The US has their own social security number. Spain has their own social security number. The UK has their own social security number, all various structures. So that means you have to have a classifying structure that can identify social security numbers across all the different regions if you're a global company. Second to that, there could be numbers like a social security number or a tax number that's identified at risky, but maybe that lives within a W-2 that's shared to someone's personal email address. Maybe that's a totally okay share. That's someone, it's tax season right now. It's February 26th. Everyone's working on their taxes. It's okay to share your W-2 with your personal email. But if you're identifying that as a risky asset that contains risky data, sure, maybe it is, but it's really not a risky scenario. And that's going to lead to a ton of false positives. Second to that is, great. let's say you somehow figure out how to classify and identify all your risky data. You scan all your assets, you have it down to the T. What does that actually mean if you don't know who has access to the risky data? So do you know if you tag an asset as highly sensitive, can you actually identify who has access to that highly sensitive asset? Does a third-party contractor that no longer works with you have access to that data? Does a former executive who recently left the company, shared that with their personal email, have access to that data? So you can do a great job of identifying all the assets within your inventory that have risky data. But if you don't know who has access to that data, the classification or the risky data identification almost goes to waste, and you're not actually putting in guardrails to actually understand if this data is accessed by the wrong people and in the wrong hands. And the third piece to tie this together of what are the existing challenges today are actually building remediation policies that scale with your business. To be able to say, okay, great. I actually know what my risky data is. I know who has access to that data, but can I actually do anything about it? And existing solutions today, often fail at these three pieces of the puzzle. One is, they're not able to identify that risky data. They're not able to bring in all the factors needed to identify risky data. Two is they don't have the ability to tell you who has risky to that data. And three, the ability to actually build those policies at scale to control that risky data are limited. Now let's talk a little bit about how Do Control is approaching this problem, in a little bit different than how the market maybe has historically thought about this. Do Control has something today what we call just-in-time DLP, just-in-time data loss prevention, and I'll talk about that and why this brings value to, especially those digitally native businesses. So first off, we can integrate with existing classification engines that you're using. So think about if you're using Google DLP today. Maybe you're doing a great job using Google DLP. You have AI classification in place, but you go back to that second bullet on the previous slide. You have no idea who has access to that risky classified data. Do Control can, one, ingest those labels. Two, start to give you visibility into who has access to that risky classified data. But three, we can also start to build policies in place to control that risky asset classified data. And that's what you can see to the right here to say, anytime someone shares something publicly that contains X file or X label, we can start to build policies in place on how to control that. But second to that, let's say you want to do another granular scan, or maybe you don't have Google policy, labels in place today. This is where we can actually start to implement that just-in-time DLP. As the risk occurs, we can run a scan and then build a policy off that. The reason being that this matters is because if you think about it, if you go back and you start to classify a bunch of data that hasn't been accessed or viewed in, let's say, 3 years, what is the point in the time of actually being able to classify that data? It takes a lot of time and effort and money to go and classify that data, where at the point what you really care about is saying, okay, is a risky asset being accessed outside the company? And that's where the just-in-time comes in place. One, it allows you to be very accurate and granular in your controls. But two, it allows you to ensure that your false positive rate is very low. It ensures that, okay, when a risky action is occurring, then I'm going to run that DLP scan and then I'm going to take action. And that ties back to the third point is being able to tie user data back to these DLP scans. So being able to say, okay, great. A file shared externally. It contains social security numbers. It contains credit card information. But who is this user that's sharing this data? Is it someone that's about to leave the company? Is it someone that's on a PIP? Is it someone that's an executive? Who is doing this action? And that's where we're adding that another level of granularity to really reduce that false positive rate. So we can bring in that user data combined with the actions that being tied within the SaaS collaboration tool. And three, scanning that content where you can now have a comprehensive approach to how you're actually approaching that granular visibility into what's happening from a classification and DLP standpoint. And the bottom part here really ties back to that third bullet that we talked about. How do you actually remediate this at scale? And there's two approaches that Do Control is taking to this that's a little bit different than the market. One is we can do historical exposure. So we can bulk remediate up to 1 million assets at once, being able to say, okay, in the past, I want to remove all my assets that are shared with gmail.com that have a Google label set as high. And or we have the ability to then set policies in place for the future. And this is where Albert's going to dive a little bit into the product on, how Do Control is uniquely built this functionality to scale with your business, where one, we can engage with end users. So we can start to educate your end users to build approval process in place to ensure we have the guardrails in place where we're not over blocking. But last but not least, we can also build policies in place to ensure data isn't overexposed. So maybe there's a scenario where you share something that contains a sensitive Google label to an approved domain. But maybe after 30, 60, 90 days, you don't want that data to be overexposed. You don't want to leave it open for too long of a period of time. And that's where DoControl's kind of workflow engine in place, where we have this unique ability to put wait periods in place. So I'm going to pause here. Obviously we have the chat here. Feel free to ask questions. When I'm going to throw it over to Albert at this point, who's going to then dive a little bit deeper into, how is DoControl uniquely solving this within our platform today?
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Great. So what Matt just described is the problem, right? You have sensitive files and you have oversharing events that happen with those sensitive files. How do you track and mitigate those scenarios? So what DoControl is doing, first of all, is building an inventory on all of your Google Drive files, whether that's in My Drive, whether that's in Shared Drive, no matter where it is, we're going to be able to ingest it. And so as you can see from here, this test domain has 190K assets, and we're separating and classifying them based off of how they're shared out. So we say these files are external, these files are internal, and these files are public. We're going a step further too with our sensitivity model, where we can determine sensitivity based off some information on the document. Does it have the word secret? Does it have the word classified and other things around that? So now we're saying that these documents are sensitive. And so as you can see, we're further classifying it again into public, external, and internal. And what we're doing with that data is now we're actually cherry picking the actual events of overexposure. So not only are we actually classifying based off of what the file is, now we're actually classifying off of who this file was shared with. Those are the two information that you really need in order to get a handle on this. So we have our alerts that take these very risky scenarios where this oversharing has happened with the sensitive files. And if I click on one of them, now you can see the full context on the oversharing event. So of course, who did it? Who is the actor of who shared to this personal email? The number of files, the file in question, and you can actually take you to the file itself. The target, so who is the destination of this oversharing event, and just any other additional context on what happened with the file. So we can see the information of the actor and the target, and we're working on some more information on just more context on the event. So this could allow you to, for instance, if you need to open an incident around this in your incident tracking system like Jira, you can do that. You can share this out with your team, and you can also potentially remediate from here. So of course, remediating the oversharing event by kicking this collaborator off of the file. If it's public, then removing the public link to the file and bumping that back to internal. So this is how DoControl is really surfacing those very risky oversharing events. We're cherry picking all of the hundreds of thousands of shares that happen daily in your company, and we're taking the most important ones and bubbling up to you using this tool.
Albert, one question that came in is, how are we identifying personal email addresses in combination with the sensitive data? I'll let you answer. I don't want to answer, but tell us a little bit around how we're identifying that personal email address.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as Matt mentioned, DoControl is hooking into potentially your HRIS and also potentially your IDP, such as Okta. And that's one way that we can surface those personal emails, because that is the place that it most likely lives in your company. In the absence of one, DoControl can still do pattern matching using NLP to kind of look at your employee list and seeing, is there a personal email that is very close to a current employee's corporate email? And we can actually determine that and surface an alert around that scenario as well.
Perfect.
Right. And so, with the alerts, these are cherry picked, very risky scenarios that we feel are important. We're bubbling up to you. The other events that may still be risky, we're going to track all this too, kind of at the asset level as well. So I can actually click on, say, all public sensitive files that I have in this test environment, and it's going to give me all of those files. So that's what you're seeing here. Every single one of these files, we have a pre-selected filter based off of what I just clicked on, and you can stack these however you like. So DoControl has a ton of filters. We built our system with the express purpose of scalability, being able to actually surface 190K total assets in this view like this, but also flexibility with the ability to stack these filters and just allow you to get really flexible and granular, and be able to save these filters if you need to come back and say, give me all the files owned by somebody that are external, for instance. But in this case, we're looking for public files that are sensitive, And so these are the filters that I've already stacked. So there's a lot of options based off of how you want to do this. So this is empowering you as an admin to get a full handle on your inventory, because there's not a lot of other ways to do this. Do Control has built this express purpose to give you that power. So, it's not just visibility. What we're also able to do from here is actually remediate. So as one of the bullet points Matt mentioned, it's great to actually get this information and have it, but you also want to be able to action on it, because being able to action on potentially like 100,000 files that may be overexposed would be really difficult without any sort of automation or scalability. So we're giving you that power. I can select all 88 of these files, and I can remove the external collaborator, or in this case, remove the public link on these files in one go. And we can do this with up to 1 billion files essentially at once. So when we have a new customer, they're able to kind of get this into a good state, before they even worry about what to do for the future. They want to clean up what is already overexposed, and especially those sensitive files where we're helping them determine that sensitivity.
One quick question that came in as well is, and we talked about earlier, is let's say I'm already using Google DLP or Google labels today. Can I do historical remediation of specific Google labels that we know are tagged as highly sensitive or of high risk?
Absolutely. So as you can see here, there is a label column. So we will actually ingest that specific metadata and surface it within this column view as well. And as I mentioned, the stackable filters, label is one great example of that. So we would sync in every single label you have, and then all you have to do is include that. And we would just return all the results with this particular label. So if I want to remediate all 34 of these and remove the public sharing, I can do so in one go.
Perfect.
And yeah. And this is really helping you from the historical level, right? You're getting to a good state. We have the sensitivity, we have the remediations, but now you might be worried, okay, I don't want to come in and do this all the time. There's a lot of oversharing events that happen, and I want to have a flexible way to respond to this. So in which case, that is where our workflows would come into play. And so this is an example of a workflow that I built in Do Control, where we are actually looking for a pretty similar set to what I just saw in the filters. So I'm looking for an oversharing event of a file being set to anyone with link, which I know is very common. And you want to do something about that. And I'm actually using the Google label, again, as a data point, as you can see here. So I'm actually saying if the label equals P0, and if one of those files gets set to anyone with link, then this workflow will trigger. That's just one example. There's a ton of events that you can do within Do Control. So another one that's a bread and butter is around, say, an external sharing event where a collaborator has been explicitly added to a file as an editor or viewer, and if you want to use a Google label as a data point with that. But you can see, we could look at download events and other oversharing events, a copy, and other scenarios like that. So however you want to customize this, but this is the example that I'm using here. And so based off the way that this triggers, we can actually scan the file as well. If you want to go further than what we've already done just with metadata, you can actually add a regex scan to that with our pre-built classifiers alongside any others that you want to add potentially. So you can add your own custom regex if you want to. For instance, I like to use the example of a company that is building something very important. They don't want that leaked out to their competitors or just to the wider world. You can actually add that top secret project as a regex list, and you can actually put that in Do Control and ensure that any file that contains that keyword, if it has an oversharing event, then this workflow will trigger.
Something else, maybe at the end we can show them where in the product where you would go to add those like custom keywords or custom regex terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And as that happens, this, first of all, this trigger, I forgot to mention this earlier, is that this workflow is going to trigger within seconds of the oversharing event. Do Control is built off of a push architecture where we are constantly streaming these events from the service, from the SaaS vendor, in this case, Google. And so, you have the oversharing event, we're going to get that within seconds. That's just the nature of how we work and how we scale. This is the best way in order to respond immediately to these scenarios. And so, once you have this, you can actually add some sort of flow control on this. So based off the way that this regex scan returns, you can have this go one of two ways, and then say, in this case, go to the decision where we're sending a notification to potentially the end user. As Matt mentioned, end user education is something that we feel is very important. So it's a key area of our product. So you can actually send it to the actor. In the case that you saw, Sav was the doing the oversharing event. She shared it to her personal email, and so it would send to her. If you want to send it to someone in IT, of course, you can just hard code their email address in here as well. So we support email, we support Slack if you want to send it to a private channel that InfoSec controls, if you want to send it to a public channel, if you want to DM the user, and again, use that actor email as a dynamic fields to send it to them, we would just transform that email to a Slack ID, no problem. And these dynamic fields can also be used at the asset level. So the notification is actually saying, please review the publicly shared file, giving you the asset name, giving you the label that was that the asset has, giving you the owner of the file and the link to the file if you want to send this to InfoSec to actually peer into the file beyond what we've already scanned. So Do Control is able to do all of that dynamically, and of course, give you now the buttons to actually perform the decision, to actually say which way do you want this decision to go. If they hit revoke, then we're going to go down the revoke path, and we're actually going to remove the public sharing link to the file automatically. You don't have to interface with the Do Control platform at all. You just hit the button in Slack or in your email. If you hit the approve path, what we can do is again send a notification that it's been approved for public sharing. And as Matt mentioned before, you can actually time gate this. So I can actually add, instead of just ending the workflow, I can actually add a month to this wait period and return the decision. And so I can actually loop back and ask the user again, do you still need to overshare this file to anyone with link? So that way the file just it won't slip through the crack, and it won't be over anyone with link forever. So this is one way that you can add some automation on what you're doing with these policies, and you're having some flexibility here where you're not just having a black and white solution and saying, okay, anyone with link is completely banned. There are some scenarios where your business may need to do this, and this is kind of helping now you deal with that and then respond to it immediately as it happens. Right.
Yeah, and I think that unique approach to be able to, one, engage the end users, I think it's important, not just from a standpoint of educating the end users, but it's also ensuring that you're not putting guardrails in place that are too strict. Like, you're starting to let the users make the decisions on if it's risky or not, but you still have those fallbacks to say, okay, let's say they say yes, they want to allow the sharing, even if it's risky data, you have that fallback to say, okay, we'll let that share happen, but we're not going to let it happen for more than X amount of time because we don't want to leave that data overexposed. So you're allowing the business to do their jobs, you're allowing them to maximize their productivity, but you're still having those guardrails to fall back on to make sure that you're not leaving data overexposed, which I think is, the most important piece. Is you never want to be too strict, but you want to have the framework in place to make sure you're not letting data be overexposed for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is providing you that flexibility to show some more customization on what you can do with this workflow. As Matt mentioned, we do support lexical lists in order to for you to put any sort of custom regex in here. So all I have to do is create a new list, say custom regex, say like a UK version of let's say national health, NHS number. And then you can put in, say, the regex of an NHS number in here. So we support pretty much custom regex in here, and we do have some more things in the future in regards to scanning coming soon. So one way that you can customize the workflow, and just a little bit of, how did these workflow trigger in the first place? Again, Do Control has a push architecture, so we can actually get this info within seconds of the oversharing event, and it's going to cover just a lot more than public links being added or external oversharing events. We can get downloads, we can get edit, we can get views, and then this is just what's powering the workflow underneath. Every few seconds you're going to see a new event, and this allows us to respond in kind very, very quickly.
Awesome.
Great.
All right, so I think we've walked through kind of the core pieces of the platform, and I think to summarize, and I'll flip it to our two faces now, is, I think everyone's kind of facing the problem today of data classification. What is it? What do we do? Even if we do data for classification, where do we go? How do we actually control it? I think Do Control is taking that, a little bit of a different approach, saying, classification is important. It's super important to understand what is in your data, but it's almost just as equally as important to understand who has access to your data, and how do we, one, combine the two, but three, how do we then build scalable policies in place in the future and in the past to actually control that exposure? And I think as you think about kind of building that comprehensive approach to your DLP program, you have to, think about all those pieces together as, how do I make sure that I'm scanning the data at the right time? Does it make sense for me to scan all my historical data, or do I only really care about scanning my data as the risk occurs? And two, how am I making sure that I know where all the data that is scanned, who has access to it, and how I'm building policies around it? Something to mention is, Do Control does offer a free risk assessment to help you quantify this risk before we even get to the remediation piece. So we can give you that kind of full visibility into that landscape of who has access to your data, how risky is your data before we get to that remediation piece. Something to mention. So, my name's Matt. This is Albert. As we mentioned, we're Do Control's team that here to support you throughout the process. We are going to run another session, I think, in probably 2 weeks. Our next session is probably going to be focused on, I think, third-party risky shadow applications. So those third-party OAuth apps integrated through your environment. So stay tuned. We'll launch some announcements around that in the coming weeks. But again, feel free to reach out to our team if you have any questions. And thank you for joining.